Is there any other business or anything that anyone else wanted to bring up today? All right. Well, then we're going to move right into our book review. Our book review today is Circling the Sun by Paula McLain. And our speaker is somebody very well known to us, Jane Focht Hansen. Jane's been here many times, and she's one of our favorite reviewers, so we're very happy to have her again today. And a little bit about Jane's background. She's taught for 24 years. She's taught English at San Antonio College. She has spent many summers on the stage crew for the first Presbyterian theater productions. I don't remember those productions, but apparently you've had them in the past. She loves to read. She's an avid reader, and she's so grateful to be here to share with us today about our book. Jane?
Well, you know, you always make me think with the books that you ask me to read, and then I have to go out and get other books to read. In the 80s, there was a resurgent interest in Isaac Dinesen, and so there was a movie we could see, Out of Africa, with Meryl Streep, and the book was published again. You could pick that up at any bookstore. And so if you have that experience in any way, when you read McLain's book, Circling the Sun, your memory will take you to some of those scenes and places. And you are sort of rounding out those stories. And so it's very interesting. I also picked up Beryl Markham's own book called West of the Night. And she doesn't really talk about the things that Paula McLain talks about. So she kind of skips over her husbands and her love, or, you know, she just kind of skips on through there, but demonstrates that she's definitely a woman ahead of her time. She's just not a 20th century girl. She's really a 21st century person. And I guess her parents are sort of disinterested for one reason or another. And so she kind of grows up running around wild. And her first language isn't English, it's Swahili. And she runs with the tribal children and not really with the girls because they don't do fun stuff. And so if you're interested in learning a little bit more about Beryl Markham from her own voice, you can take a look at her book, West with the Night. It's really good writing, and an interesting thing, she's in the 80s kind of not living very well, not accessing much money, and so republication of this text allows her to live comfortably for the rest of her life. And so she's a cracker, boy. I can't imagine trying to keep up with her. And the interesting part is, of course, you're familiar with McLain's writing. We talked about The Paris Wife some months ago, and McLain kind of does the same thing here. She creates a landscape, if you will, for us to join in and meet this person. And it's a first-person voice, which makes it a really easy read. You want to get right in there. And you're trying to figure out how in the world this little bitty girl turns out the way that she does. But it's not intentional, but it's no surprise that she just isn't going to accept normal convention. She doesn't want to wear lots of lace and frocks. She wants to run around barefooted. She wants to learn about the land and the people and the animals. And as much as McLain did a great job with the voice of Hadley Richardson, this 2016 novel introduces us to Beryl Markham in a very different kind of way, not just the photographs of a very stately, long-limbed beauty who is the first woman to fly across the Atlantic, but a person who is very complex, not easy to understand, and perhaps so far ahead of her time. There's a little note on the book, so far ahead of her time, she has the power to soar, and that's literal. She decides she wants to learn to fly a plane after her male friends are learning to fly planes, and she's completely undaunted by the idea that her gender might suggest anything otherwise. In a 2015 NPR interview, McLain told a reporter that she'd found a really simple way to connect with Markham after she began to do her research, and it turns out that Beryl Markham, like Paula McLain, was abandoned by her mother at about age 4, and neither one sees their mom again until they're almost 20. And so for a 21st century or a late 20th century person, that's probably less troubling than it might be for an early 20th century woman. So here is this amazing character, the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean from east to west, the daughter of a racehorse trainer. She is essentially allowed freedom on her father's Kenyan farm, and she runs around barefooted. When she doesn't like her governess, she puts a dead snake in her bed. A black mamba, which is nothing to play with. And we find that she is a contemporary of people like Amelia Earhart, Charles Lindbergh, of course, Isaac Dinesen, and Dennis Finch Hatton. And she seems an iconoclast. She makes everyone uncomfortable, and equally so. And she is completely unwilling to accept any kind of limitation or convention. She's just too independent. And so if we look at these features of her personality, perhaps, like McLain suggests, this is a reflection of one woman's life, a life that's unheard of before this kind of time. And so in the early 20th century, we have lots of women explorers, if you will, all over the world doing very different things and living in conditions that ordinarily people would say are not appropriate for women. The prologue of the book begins as Markham is getting ready to fly her plane across the Atlantic, and the story then is a reflection of what brought her to that point. And so I think what I learned about Beryl Markham and maybe about Paula McLain is that the energy of challenge, the stimulus of challenge is really what drives most of us, and definitely Beryl Markham. So Markham sets off to reflect on her memories, and the reader goes right along with her on this journey, which is really unique in terms of the times, the place, and this kind of woman. And maybe she's not too extraordinary today, because certainly women say no to a variety of things all the time. But this was definitely a person who thought no challenge was too huge for her. And so, as I've said earlier, McLain is very similar in her upbringing with Markham. And so, what does that suggest about a family structure? And for Beryl Markham, it suggests that her parents are relatively unique people. If they're completely uncomfortable, they don't suffer that for very long. And so as a 2-year-old, Beryl goes with her father to Kenya, and he sets up horse farming. Her mother and older brother return, but they don't stay very long because it's not an opulent setting. They're basically living in a converted hut at the beginning, and there's certainly not a lot of hot and cold running water. There's no ice. These are things that you have to go to town or to the club to access. And Beryl's mother is completely uncomfortable, and she just says, "I'm done," and they go back to England. She's born Beryl Clutterbuck, October 26, 1902 in England, and spends most of her childhood in Kenya. she only lives a very short time with her entire family and visits with them a little bit in her life. And she's confused. The people that live in Kenya with her recognize that. And so the tribal group, the Kip tribe, decide on her behalf that she needs to be a little bit more controlled. So they take her through a few ceremonies and continue to interact with her. And what we find is she develops a desire to become a warrior because she's running around with the boys all the time. And so her feet have turned to leather because she's barefooted. My mother despaired of that when I was a girl. She doesn't have tender feet, and she doesn't intend to. And even when her father puts her to bed on time, she waits until she hears his breathing even, and then she sneaks out the window and goes down and hangs out with the tribe and her friends. Maybe that's something we did later on when we were older. But she's really interesting in that way. It seems like no negative answer stops her. She just figures out something else to do. So while her father builds this farm, she runs around freely. She learns to hunt and track. She learns to avoid problems. She confronts problems. You learn all about horse sense in the book. There's just a lot of practical information there about how to estimate a horse. She reflects on how her father does it, and she learns through his example. And so those are all kind of really traditional ways, especially in Texas, of learning how to handle livestock on a ranch. The tribal group also renames her. They call her Lakwet, little girl, because they're trying to remind her of her role, but they don't force her into anything. And that works in a lot of very positive ways, I think in a lot of pretty negative ways. The fun thing about this book is that it's so rich. The writing, just like the previous book, allows you to transport yourself to that place and time. And so it's almost like a vacation. If you haven't been to Africa, but you've seen National Geographic or you've seen Out of Africa, any movie set in Africa, you can kind of put yourself right there. You might know where some of those landmarks are or close to them. And the way that the story reveals itself is dense and interesting, very descriptive, but also fascinating. It's hard to put down. And when Paula McLain works with Beryl's voice, you get the first person. So it's kind of like you're sitting next to somebody you met maybe on an airplane, and they're telling you all about their lives. I was thin and knock-kneed with unruly white blonde hair, but my new name and place soon helped to toughen me. Running up and down our hill to the Kip village, my feet quickly turned to leather. Portions of our land that had frightened or intimidated me before became as familiar as the zebra skins that covered my bed. When the daylight bled away, I would climb under the skins and watch the houseboy pad soundlessly into my room on bare feet to light the hurricane lamp. Sometimes a sudden flare and hiss sent skinks in the hut walls flitting into hiding. The sound of them like sticks against straw. Then came the changing of the guard as the daylight insects, hornets, and mason flies tucked into mud nests in the rounded walls, and the crickets woke, sawing in a rhythm only they knew. It's just really lyrical. And in 21st century writing, to lead from one idea into the next with this kind of consistency is really remarkable. A lot of times writers today try to break that process. I think it's to drive the reader deeper into the story, but maybe I'm old-fashioned. I just like to be led there, and then whatever kind of memory or experience I've had that connects, it's all the richer. She talks about the women in the tribal village and how different they are. She's just not used to seeing women do things. She says, Kibi'i's mother and the other women drank a murky tea made of bark and nettles and spun out their tales of how everything had come to be. I learned most of my Swahili there, more and more eager for stories, how the hyena got his limp and the chameleon his patience, how the wind and rain had once been men before they failed at some important task and were banished to the heavens. The women themselves were wizened and toothless or suppled as polished ebony, with long muscled limbs under pale shukas. I loved them and their tales, but I wanted more to join Ki'ibi and the other Totos when they were becoming warriors. The role of girls in the village was entirely domestic. I had a different position, a rare one, free from the traditional roles that governed Kibi'i's family set and also my own. At least for the moment, the Kip elders allowed me to train with him, to throw a spear and hunt warthogs, studying stealth as the boys did, their fathers, warriors in the village, also my ideals of strength and fearlessness. I was taught to fashion a bow and take down wood pigeons and waxwings and vivid blue starlings, and to snap a rhino hide whip and wield a knotted wooden throwing club with deadly accuracy. I grew as tall as Kibi'i, and then taller, running just as swiftly through the tall gold grasses, our feet flowered with dust. She's really a fine writer, and interestingly, she talks about in some of the author interviews, she talks about how difficult it is to be picked up as a writer today, and that she really feels like she just kind of fell into it. Everything fell into place at the right time for her, but she says only after she found the right subject material. She was trying to write about Marie Curie, and it wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't very exciting. You know, a scientist's life is very consistent. And she runs into Beryl Markham after she finishes her book on Hadley Richardson and just kind of thinks, wow, this is it. This is what I need to do. So again, she's not unlike the woman she's writing about, you know, who kind of falls into certain things and then, oh, I'll do that. Whether it's a good choice or not early on is pretty difficult to measure, but boy, she just stops at nothing. She just keeps going. This is a kind of tender biography. It is not as critical of the person as some of the other biographies are. That Markham is even cold, that once she's ready to move on, everything sort of flows off her back and she just moves forward. She doesn't carry a lot of grief with her at any point. So Clutterbuck's farm begins to take off, and she learns from her father by observing him in the barns, figuring out how to deal with breeding stock, seeing some successful and unsuccessful births. And she also deals with those tensions between being a properly raised English girl and a tomboy. And it feels like a lot of the other characters in the book kind of prefer the tomboys, but then again, when they get to town and to much more organized and responsible activities, I guess, they worry for her that she won't be able to fit in. She's involved with a family called the Delamares, and again, if you've seen Out of Africa, they're in there. He goes with Blixen to fight in the war, and you know, Karen Blixen brings them beef. Lady Delamere came over and sat near me, settling her white cotton skirt out in front of her and leaning back on her hands. She wasn't ever fussy or prim, and I adored that about her. I have some nice biscuits if you like. I'm not hungry, I said. I was ravenous. Your hair is wilder every time I see it. She gently nudged the plate of biscuits in my direction. It's such a wonderful color, a little like coquettes, actually. That got me. Do you think so? She nodded. I don't suppose you'd let me brush it? I, too, was out of sorts to enjoy sitting still and having my hair fussed over, but I let her do it. She had a silver-handled brush with a beautiful soft bristle, and I always liked to run my fingers over. There was nothing feminine in our house anymore, no silk or satin or perfume or jewelry or powder puffs. The brush was exotic. While Lady D worked, humming a little, I fell on the biscuits, and soon the plate was nothing but buttery crumbs. "Where'd you get that fierce-looking scar?" she asked. I looked down at the jagged worst of it poking from beneath the frayed hem of my short trousers. A long, rippled wound that went halfway up my thigh. It did look pretty rough. Wrestling totos. Totos are bush pigs. I trounced one of the Kip boys and threw him over my shoulder onto the ground. He was so embarrassed he waited for me in the forest and slashed out at me with his father's knife. "What?" She made an alarmed noise. "I had to go after him, didn't I? I couldn't keep the pride out of my voice. He looks far worse than I do." So for the turn of the 20th century, this is pretty extraordinary behavior. And I imagine that these folks are kind of bemused by her ability to just sort of take things in. As much as the local Europeans knew of her and interacted with her, Markham is noted as one of the most resistant of girls. She endures a lion attack at a neighboring farm and runs wild in circumstances in which no gently raised young woman should. Then she's sent to Nairobi for an education, but is later released from her finishing school for being too disruptive. "Beryl's had a bit of a day," Lady D warned him. "She's going to go off to school in Nairobi." Ah! He settled himself gruffly in a chair opposite me. I wondered when that would come up. "You'll be grand at it, girl. Really, you will. I've always said you were sharp as a tack." "I'm not so sure." I made a half-hearted attempt to finish my tea, which had grown cold. "Swear you'll come and visit us when you can. You have a home here, too. You always will." When I said goodbye, Lady D walked me out to the stable and put her hands on my shoulders. "There's no girl quite like you, Beryl, and you're going to do well in Nairobi. You'll do well anywhere." It was nearly dark when I reached the farm, and the mountains were an inky blue and seemed to shrink and flatten against the distance. Wee McGregor created our hill, bringing us to the edge of the paddock, and I saw Kibi'i heading off toward the path onto his village. I thought of calling out to him, but I'd had enough difficult talking for one day, and I didn't know how to tell him I'd be leaving soon. I didn't know how to say goodbye. Over the next 2.5 years, I did my best at school, though my best was hardly up to scratch. I ran away a half dozen times, once hiding in a pig hole for 3 days. Another time I sparked a rebellion that had most of the school bolting onto the plains after me on their bicycles. That got me sacked finally. My father met my train looking cross, but also relieved, as if he understood that sending me away was never going to work. But the farm wasn't at all the place I'd left. The world wasn't the same, actually, and the war had made certain of that. We'd heard all the biggest bits of news at the school about the Archduke's assassination, about Kaiser Wilhelm, and how nations we'd scarcely heard of had banded together to fight for one another. So I think she is impacted greatly by ill fortune, and she doesn't let that stop her for very long either. When her father goes broke, she marries a local farmer who is twice her age, and she doesn't really know what a successful marriage looks like, so she thinks maybe what's going on is okay. So at 16, she meets and marries. And I kept thinking about 16. And so looking back at 16 from 57 is pretty crazy, because you didn't know anything. But when you were 16, you knew everything, right? And so I'm trying to think, how does that work? How do you get married when you're 16 years old? I'm just flummoxed by that. I was 26, and I only hope I was ready. I don't know. So as a 16-year-old girl, she thinks she's married a man who has some experience. He's been in the military. He doesn't actually know much about positive relationships either. And yet, he's fascinated by this girl. And certainly a 16-year-old who doesn't care what other people think about her and is willing to go on any adventure, that might be a pretty interesting person. So she marries a neighbor, Jock Purvis. Purvis, as my father called him, looking a great deal cleaner than he had done twisting fence wire and more handsome now that we were nose to nose. When he spun me close, I smelled shaving powder and gin, though I didn't have the slightest bit of experience with men or swooning. I could tell by Dose's look as we came past her table again that it was high time I learned. There were lots of men like Jock in town, discharged soldiers who'd taken their settlement allotment and snatched up acreage, handsome. They were trying to reinvent themselves in a purposeful way. He was strong-looking and squared off everywhere, shoulders and jaw and chin. This was what a man was supposed to be, I thought, if you could build him from scratch and break him in like new land. "Is your fence still standing?" I asked him. "Well, why wouldn't it be?" "Well, any number of things," I laughed, starting with marauding elephants. "You think I'm funny?" "No," I let my voice trail off. "A certain kind of man comes to Africa and builds fences." "Is that what you think?" "How would I know?" I threw out. "I'm only 16. "You were never 16. He was flattering me, but I didn't mind much. I'd had 3 glasses of champagne by then, and everything was beginning to seem wonderful. Jack's dark jacket under my hand, the band in an alcove opposite the bar, the tuba a golden blur. The horn player seemed to be winking at me, and then there were the other partygoers, girls sailing by us in silk dresses, gardenias tickled like stars into their hair. He glanced around. "You outshine them," he said. Out on the farm there had been no occasion to flirt. I hadn't learned how to try to draw a man in, so I simply said what I thought, even though it stamped me as insecure. "Emma says I don't paint well. All that rouge and face powder has to come off at some point. Maybe it's better you don't." We danced for half a minute in silence, and then he said, "These town girls all come from the same box of sweets anyway. I think I'll marry you instead." "What?" I breathed, caught off guard. He grinned, his teeth neat and shiny and square. "You are wearing a white dress." "Oh." I leaned back in his arms and felt my head go all woozy. So it's really quite human and compelling as a read. Whether or not the real person is as interesting on a personal level is difficult to say. She certainly entrances a good number of people that you meet in McLain's book, and there's a little backed up in her own book. She marries very quickly at age 16, not really understanding what it's all about. She doesn't know enough to slow down, and as she plans the next phase of her life, she watches as her father's farm loses money, and all hope dissolves. He eventually faces bankruptcy. And on the honeymoon in Bombay, the environment is no more encouraging, and she figures out she's pretty miserable, even though this is supposed to be a wonderful experience, a trip to another country, and new people to grow to enjoy. Trying to put little pencil marks in here that I could see. Not so much. All right. My father seemed to take it on the chin, or pretended to, but I was mortified to see our failings at Green Hill so publicly exposed. I wanted everyone to remember what was marvelous about our farm, how it had been built up from nothing at all, how happy we'd been there. But after 16 years of impossibly hard work and high standards, now all anyone wanted to talk about was failure. Green Hills had become a dark joke, and my father a cautionary tale, someone to pity. The auction process dragged on for several grueling months. Buyers came, haggling over the price of wheelbarrows and pitchforks and riding tack. One day, you might want to train for other owners, my dad said one day, maybe even for Delamere. You've got the right base and you've got the instincts. Get my trainer's license, you mean? How does a woman do that? Well, maybe not, but there aren't any rules against it. I could try. I'll let the words trail away. Take care of yourself and work hard. I will, Daddy. Neither one of us had ever been good at voicing our feelings. I told him I would miss him and then watched him board his train, the back of his shoulders defiantly straight under his jacket. His departure had been months and months in coming, and still I wasn't nearly ready. Did he know how much I loved him? How sick and raw I felt to lose all that we had shared? So she has pretty deep and meaningful emotions, but finally getting her to express that is a little difficult. And I don't think that she's not a deep person. I just don't think she has the means, right? If you haven't seen other people summon up the courage and the words, it's hard to learn how to do that for yourself. And she's not reading literature. You know, she's outdoors. She's reading people. She's reading land. She's reading the weather. And so while all of these sort of abilities to perceive are very important, maybe they don't help too much with human interaction. It's also during this time that Markham discovers that she is as uncomfortable in her marriage as her husband is. And, we could look at Jock as somebody who doesn't really know how to relate to a woman. He's been in the military. He's come back from war. They're in a farming circumstance. And she's not patterned after any kind of woman he's ever really met before. And so they're uncomfortable. And while other things happen that draw them apart, it's also this independence that seems to be difficult for him to accept. And McLain says, when he stormed off to bed, I still didn't know where we stood. I slept in front of the hearth, tossing back and forth, feeling alternately too cold and too hot. I thought we would have it out in the morning, but the row lasted for 3 days. Whatever he was sorting out, it seemed to have less to do with losing me than with the sullying of his reputation and how the colony might perceive his failings. I understood that. He had married me because it was time to marry, and that was all. His family had expected it of him to complete the picture of a settled and prosperous life. He certainly wouldn't let them down now. He was too proud and had always managed to take control of any wayward detail in his life. Deep-rooted tree stumps in the field, boulders where a garden should go. He came at every obstacle with muscle and gumption, but he couldn't simply strong-arm me. Or could he? So, she's a puzzle. And I think as you read the book, you recognize that she is as puzzling to others as their world is puzzling to her. And that's pretty apparent by the time she travels to London. So once she practices horse training at Delamere's and she earns her license, which is unheard of, women don't do that. She also recognizes that that the circumstance that she lives in, the circumstance of her own ability, is unusual at best. And she has a little friend named Cocky who recurs in the book. And she says, Cocky gave me a complicated smile. You've heard the joke, haven't you? Are you married or do you live in Kenya? That's funny. I shook my head, and it's sort of awful, too. Only the day before, Cocky's dark joke would have included me, but wouldn't have included me, but now it did. Is love always such a mess, do you suppose? Well, maybe not everywhere, but the rules are different here. It's sort of assumed that you'll have dalliances or go crazy, but discretion still plays an essential part. You can do anything as long as the right people stay shielded. And the funny thing is, that doesn't always mean your spouse. So McLain does deal with the pretty complicated lifetime situations that Markham goes through in much more detail than Markham ever does. And my sense, I think just from looking at the way that Markham wrote her book, is she just doesn't think it's that big a deal. It's just part of life, and you just keep moving, or you don't move toward more life. And so while the book certainly illustrates all of the things that she goes through, it doesn't go into a great deal more detail. But I think the illustrations of the tension is pretty intense. And there were a few times where I'd read and I think, wow, I have no idea what to think right now. Because you get in a kind of a pattern thinking about the character, and then you turn a few pages and she's changed again, and you're not ready for that. And it feels like that's the sort of the same pattern that people around her observe. And so maybe, 1 minute she's just this really strong person who can train horses and live in Kenya, and the next minute she has no clue how to interact in a room with coffee and cake and a social situation in terms of being comfortable. And other biographies talk extensively about how she would much rather go smoke cigarettes with the guys outside than to try to figure out how to get along with the women indoors. And so, not unlike Texas either, maybe. And it's about this time she also meets Dennis Finch-Hatton. And Finch-Hatton is definitely a romantic figure in almost every bit of material I've read about him. I have not yet read his book. I thought it would be too distracting. But there is a sort of lover's triangle set up between Dennison, Finch-Hatton, and Beryl Markham. And while it doesn't really go on at the same time, the heartache part goes on at all the same time. And Finch-Hatton is just as much an iconoclast as Markham would be. Probably Dennison worries a little bit more about how much people, perceive her life, or if they speak about her, but that also doesn't stop her. Once she decides that she is, totally uncomfortable and ready to move on, she has already met Finch-Hatton and she's met Blixen. They all live basically in the same neighborhood, if you will, over these ranch lands. And they're very cordial. She and Blixen are very cordial. They find some similarities, some consistent frustrations they've each experienced. And I suppose probably 3 different biographies talk about how Blixen is almost like a mother figure in that she kind of helps Markham decompress from those pressures of thinking through, why am I in this situation, what contributed. And Karen Blixen says to her, I knew what I bargained for when I married Broer, when I actually had very little idea of it. I took a bolstering swallow of Calvados. You could be talking about my marriage. That's just how I feel. And will you get your divorce, do you think? I hope so. I'm afraid to apply any pressure just now. We're all of us afraid of many things. But if you make yourself smaller, or you let your fear confine you, then you really aren't your own person at all, are you? The real question is whether or not you will risk what it takes to be happy. Pretty wonderful line from this book. So Markham continues to land in, unique circumstance after unique circumstance. She's juxtaposed between independent friends and partners and lovers and husbands and soon-to-be ex-husbands, even sugar daddies. Once she divorces Jock, she invests herself even more deeply in horse training, and by 1925, she's able to reunite, however briefly, with her mother. And in the book, it's really brief. At one of my events, I spotted my mother in a towering feather hat cheering me on. I hadn't seen her for over a year, and I felt a jolt, stinging and complex. I still didn't know who she was in my life or how to be anywhere near her without feeling waylaid. Maybe I never would. It makes me proud to see you doing so well, she said when she searched me out afterwards. Congratulations. She finished her drink and readied herself to leave, saying, "It was wonderful to see that you're getting what you deserve." So yeah, that's really deeply familial relationship. And how confusing that must be if your own mom can't find a way to talk to you, to be with you, to know who you are. The rest of the novel is a reflection on what Markham doesn't really discuss in her own book, as I've said, her next two ex-husbands, her son, her mother. She determines that she's going to become a pilot because of the influences of Finch Hatton and others, and she wants to see what they see. So when they take her up, she's over the Savannah lands, over the highlands, the lakeland. She can see a huge swath of Africa in an afternoon, and she wants to, be a part of the intrinsic beauty of the land and its freedom and those inhabitants. And the plane is an amazing apparatus for the early 20th century, that it opens up the doors to all kinds of global interaction, but also for people who want to learn to fly planes, they have to learn to deal with the vagaries of the operation. And so she describes how these planes sometimes fail in midair, and you have to do these little tricks. And I thought maybe that was only like during World War II when my dad talked about how they had to play with the plane sometimes to make it keep going. But it happens in the 20s and 30s as well. Even when she's flying across the Atlantic, she has to know before she gets in the plane that it's going to fail at some point. She's got to have enough patience and calm thought process that she can get it back going again so she doesn't crash. And so, we don't always think about crashing in planes these days. And there is some occurrence there, certainly, but what she sees is a good number of her best friends who come in and out of her life over a period of about 15 years, and they get in a plane and they infect everybody with the energy of what you can achieve by getting in a plane. And so there are more pilots, and then they begin to crash. And these are not planes that you can easily right anyway, and so the crashes are pretty catastrophic. And Finch Hatton is buried out on the Savannah lands, and other of her friends as well. But I think that as you finish the book, you're really able to see how her curiosity and her drive and her rejection of this idea that, girls shouldn't do that. She just doesn't even entertain that idea after she's a little girl. It's just not there. And that may be part of what makes her so interesting. But the author, McLain, writes about her in the notes at the back of the novel, which I think are sometimes more interesting sometimes. And there's also a reader's guide in the back there that you'll enjoy. Beryl was undoubtedly complicated, a riddle, a libertine, a maverick, a sphinx. But strangely, as I was writing her character and pitching myself deeply into her world, she became more knowable and familiar to me in some ways than Hadley Hemingway in my novel, The Paris Wife. Beryl and I share at least one profound piece of emotional genealogy. My mother also vanished from my life when I was 4 and returned when I was 20. I felt a bone-deep jolt when I discovered that link, and it became one reliable way to get close to Beryl and gain important insight into some of her more difficult choices. The loss of her son, for instance, is utterly heartbreaking to me. Though she would never be very close to Jervis, who remained in England with Mansfield's mother, apparently he inherited Beryl's willfulness and her stoicism. He was proud of his mother's adventurous spirit and accomplishments, and felt more fondness for her than for his father, it appears, who was even more distant and unavailable. She died in Nairobi in 1986 at the age of 83, near the 50th anniversary of her record-breaking flight, and perhaps thinking of the moment she climbed into her goal, tucking a hip flask of brandy into her flight jumpsuit. "Twende tu," she called out in Swahili as she buckled her helmet. "I am going." So I think this is a really fine novel. If you haven't had time to read it, maybe you will now. If you have some questions, I'm happy to try to answer those, sir.
In her own autobiography book, I guess that's what that is. Can you tell, does the actual flight end the way it does in the book with the crash landing in a bog in Newfoundland?
Yes,
So,
she does crash.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not catastrophic, which is a miracle.
that is, yeah, because I don't see how you can land a plane, and come to an abrupt stop in a bog without getting killed, because that's, even those planes would still, it's still going at least, 40 or 50 miles an hour when they hit the ground.
I think, we know a lot about pilots and the way that they develop an intuition about their planes and about the circumstances that they're in. And that seems to be really the only explanation. It's kind of like Sully. How did he do that? Yes, ma'am.
If this were a movie, who would be the best actresses from the 40s and 50s to play the role?
I don't know. I kind of like Lauren Bacall for that. Today, I think they'd probably get Charlize Theron from South Africa, because she's got the height and the, kind of veracity. But yeah, I did think a lot about that.
You think it would make a good movie?
I do, but I think it would have to be kind of an indie market. I'm not sure that everybody's willing to believe that girls are this exciting and dangerous and tough. And, I know lots of moms who worked really hard to get those edges off their daughters sometimes. But I can also say that, sometimes it's important to be the woman in the room who says, you know what, that's just BS. And I don't think Beryl would have been that polite. I think she would have just used her father's barn vernacular, perhaps. Yes, sir.
Does her book have more about the duration of the flight? In this book, it's a little frustrating. In the prologue, the engine is stalled out, and she's 800 feet above the ocean.
Yeah.
And, you're left to think, well, did she crash or what? And then at the end, the plane has caught, just before, and then pretty soon she's seeing the coast of, through the fog,
Yeah.
coast of Newfoundland. But
It's
it
quick,
told
you're
you
right.
like there's 30 some odd hours, 36 hours or 33, whatever it is, which to me is, kind of an impossibly long time to stay sufficiently awake, to survive, to survive. That's just incredible.
Well, and, I mean, I think it must have been really uncomfortable, because they jettisoned so much out of the plane. And it sort of feels like, my dad would talk about how if they had a heavy payload, they would just throw stuff out. People were sitting on milk cartons or something, milk crates to do their work because it was lighter than whatever had been provided. And it kind of feels like she has very little in there with her. And if she doesn't stay awake, it's over. And it's so dark, I suppose all you can really do is, kind of point towards the next point of light and keep going.
Well, it mentions the bad weather. I mean, to add to all of that, not even to have visual flight conditions. She's just in the dark and
Yeah.
kind of in the fog a lot, and only looking at the instruments. And this is back in the 1930s. I mean, that just seems like an incredible feat.
I mean, Lindbergh does it, and Amelia Earhart, and, they just don't really, I haven't read a lot where they've labored over that condition. They just have to keep going. And it seems very frustrating to fly into, so much darkness and not really know what the results will be. But, that's what explorers do for us every day. And, we don't know where we're going to be tomorrow. So we're kind of adventurous, even if we keep our feet in San Antonio or close to our comfy homes. We have our small explorations, and those are important. Getting maybe the energy to decide to take a trip that might be as adventurous as this comes from other influence. We desire it, but we just don't know what will happen next. And will I be comfortable? And is it possible? Is it too expensive? Is it, all those things roil in our heads. And I don't know, I can't tell you that I feel like she thinks a lot about things. I'm just like, let's go. I don't think she worries about it. I'm on to the next thing. This is painful and I'm going to walk away.
Sorry to keep that, but the book makes a great deal about her torn feelings about the son being taken away and lived with this mother-in-law, wealthy mother or proper mother-in-law, I forget the name of the town in England. And does she talk about that in the book much?
She doesn't in her own book, no. Yeah. She really doesn't. It's like he doesn't really, maybe she thinks she doesn't want to impede his life in some way, but I also read that her granddaughters never met her. And, one would think that no matter what your medical or physical condition is when you're a little kid, if you have access to your mom in any way, you're going to at least take your children to meet her. It's not impossible to fly to Nairobi in his lifetime. And I don't know, maybe they never thought of it. I don't know. It is kind of sketchy. And she doesn't, and maybe that's her purpose. She doesn't really want to tell a lot because we all want to go look it up. And so if it's, her story is told from whatever perspective she's operating with at the moment, is going to be very different than, what history suggests or what other storytellers present, or even what Paula McLain is able to unfold for us. Those women explorers, right? Amelia Earhart did not leave us a lot of additional information. She didn't really think about it. She just wanted to get on with it. And the possibility and the probability were in her favor. That's pretty brave stuff. But, I guess also these are stories of expectations, other people's expectations, our own expectations. And, you know, what does that do to us? Where does that lead us? What kind of backbone does that help us create for ourselves? Because she's really strong, but also, you know, she, in a social situation, she would not be trying to meet and greet everybody. It would be more, well, what are the fellas doing? Are they playing poker? Are they outside with their cigars? I'm going to go find the fun because, oh, they're just having tea, these ladies. So they just don't know. Anybody else have questions? Okay.
Well, thank you, Jane. This is really
It's a great book.
It is.
It's a great
worth
book.
your time to read it. It
Yeah.
goes really fast.
Thank you very much.